Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books here at the live studios at Hythe, Kent, southeast England. The word Hythe in Hungarian means haven. So here we are in the haven of sanity as the world goes completely upside down and bonkers, as we say in England, due to this coronavirus lockdown all over the world. And now they're starting wars, whether or not to stop the lockdown or not. And insane things are coming out. Shoot up, like disinfectant, maybe it'll kill it. I mean, the things that are coming out are just crazy and crazier and crazier. But here in the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books, we are becoming saner and saner and saner by hearing the teachings of Krishna, by hearing Srila Prabhupada, and by hearing the empowered words empowered by Srila Prabhupada, and especially this Uddhava Gita. It's making us saner and saner and saner, and more aware of what's actually going on here. So with that introduction, we'll start to read the prologue rather, Srimad Bhagavata Mahima Stotram, the glories of the Srimad Bhagavatam, composed by Srila Sanatana Goswami. 5 short verses that says it all. It goes like this. Sarva Shastrabdipi Yusha, Sarva Vedaika Satpala, Sarva Siddhanta Ratnadya, Sarva Lokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana, Srimad Bhagavata Prabho, Kalidwandodita Ditya, Sri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya, Prema Varshakshadayate, Sarvada Sarvasevyaya, Sri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin, Madguro Man Mahadana, Man Nishtadaka Mad Bhagya, Mad Ananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu saduta dayin, adini chochita kara, hanamun chagadachin mam, premna rit kantayospura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, Uddhava Gita. Krishna is explaining everything to Uddhava. He's unpacking things that have already been stated. That he stated in the Gita, been stated in the Bhagavatam very many times, and each time it gets a little bit more unpacked, a little bit more clear. Now he's going to unpack it again. We've reached chapter 28, starting from text 1. Jnana-yoga. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one should neither praise nor criticize the conditioned nature and activities of other persons. Rather, one should see this world as simply the combination of material nature and the enjoying souls, all based on the one absolute truth. Purport. Material situations and activities appear to be good, passionate, or ignorant, according to the interaction of the modes of nature. These modes are produced by the illusory potency of the Lord, which is itself not different from its master, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So a devotee of the Lord remains aloof from the illusory, temporary manifestations of material nature. At the same time, he accepts material nature as the potency of the Lord, and thus essentially real. The example may be given that modeling clay is shaped by a child into various playful forms, such as tigers, men, or houses. The modeling clay is real, whereas the temporary shapes it assumes are illusory, not being actual tigers, men, or houses. Similarly, the entire cosmic manifestation is modeling clay in the hands of the Supreme Lord, who acts through Maya to shape the glaring temporary forms of illusion, which absorb the minds of those who are not devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 2. Whoever indulges in praising or criticizing the qualities and behavior of others will quickly become deviated from his own best interest by his entanglement in illusory dualities. Purport. A conditioned soul desires to lord it over material nature, and thus criticizes another conditioned soul, whom he considers inferior. Similarly, one praises a superior materialist because one aspires to that superior position, in which one may dominate others. Praising and criticizing other materialistic people are thus directly or indirectly based on envy of other living entities, and cause one to fall down from swarartha, one's real self-interest, Krishna consciousness. The words asatya abhiminishata, the words asit abhini vishata, by absorption in the temporary or unreal, indicate that one should not adopt a concept of material duality and praise or criticize other materialistic persons. Rather, one should praise the pure devotees of the Supreme Lord and criticize the mentality of rebellion against the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by which one becomes a non-devotee. One should not criticize a low-class materialist, thinking that a high-class materialist is nice. In other words, one should distinguish between the material and the spiritual, and should not become absorbed in good and bad on the material platform. For example, an honest citizen distinguishes between the life of civil freedom and that of imprisonment, whereas a foolish prisoner distinguishes between comfortable and uncomfortable prison cells. Just as for a free citizen any situation in prison is unacceptable, for a liberated, Krishna-conscious devotee, any material position is unappealing. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur indicates that rather than trying to separate conditioned souls by materialistic distinctions, one should bring them together to chant the holy names of the Lord and propagate the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya. A non-devotee, or even an envious third-class devotee, is not interested in uniting people on the platform of love of Godhead. Instead, he unnecessarily separates them by emphasizing material distinction, like communist, capitalist, black, white, rich, poor, liberal, conservative, and so on. Material life is always imperfect, full of ignorance, and disappointing in the end. Rather than praising and criticizing the high and low features of ignorance, one should be absorbed in Krishna consciousness on the spiritual platform of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. Text 3. Just as the embodied spirit soul loses external consciousness when his senses are overcome by the illusion of dreaming or the death-like state of deep sleep, so a person experiencing material duality must encounter illusion and death. Purport. The material senses are described here as taijasa because they are born of false ego and the motive passion. Impelled by false ego, one dreams of the material world without the personality of Godhead, and makes plans to lord it over nature, to exploit her resources. Modern atheistic scientists have developed this false ego to a fine art and imagine themselves great heroes conquering the obstacles of nature and moving forward toward inevitable omniscience. Such dreamy materialists are repeatedly stunned by the crushing reactions of the laws of nature, and their arrogant, agnostic civilizations are repeatedly annihilated by world wars, natural disasters, and violent shifts of the cosmic situation. Coronavirus? On a simpler level, all conditioned souls are captivated by sex attraction, and thus bound to the illusion of material society, friendship, and love. They imagine themselves to be wonderful enjoyers of the material nature, which suddenly turns against them and kills them, just like the tamed animal that suddenly turns on its master and kills him. Text 4. That which is expressed by material words or meditated upon by the material mind is not ultimate truth. What therefore is actually good or bad within this insubstantial world of duality, and how can the extent of such good and bad be measured? What therefore is actually good or bad within this insubstantial world of duality, and how can the extent of such good and bad be measured? Purport. The actual truth is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything emanates, by whom everything is maintained, and in whom everything merges to rest. Material nature is the reflection of the absolute truth, and by the interaction of the material modes of nature, the innumerable varieties of matter appear to be separate, independent truths. Maya, illusion, distracts the conditioned soul from the absolute truth and absorbs his mind in the glaring manifestation of matter, which ultimately is non-different from the absolute truth, being an emanation from him. The sense of good and bad, as separate from the Supreme Lord, is like the good and bad dreams experienced by a sleeping person. Good and bad dreams are equally unreal. Similarly, material good and evil have no permanent existence separate from the personality of Godhead. The Supreme Lord is the well-wisher of every living entity, and therefore execution of his order is good. whereas disobeying his order is bad. Lord Krishna has created a perfect social and occupational system called Varnashram Dharma, and the Lord has further given perfect spiritual knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita and other literatures. Execution of Lord Krishna's order will bring complete social, psychological, political, economic, and spiritual success to human society. We should not foolishly look for so-called good outside the orders of the personality of Godhead. Such orders are called the laws of God and constitute the essence or substance of religion. Text 5. Although shadows, echoes, and mirages are only illusory reflections of real things, such reflections do cause a semblance of meaningful or comprehensible perception. In the same way, although the identification of the conditioned soul with the material body, mind, and ego is illusory, this identification generates fear within him, even up to the point of the moment of death. Purport. Although shadows, echoes, and mirages are mere reflections of real substances, they create strong emotions in persons falsely accepting them as real. In the same manner, a conditioned soul is seized by such emotions as fear, lust, anger, and hope because of his illusory perception of himself as the material body, mind, and false ego. By practical example, it is thus shown that even illusory objects may cause highly emotional reactions. Ultimately, our emotions should be absorbed in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is eternal truth. Fear is forever vanquished when one takes shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. One can then enjoy the pure emotions of liberated life. Text 6 and 7. The Supersoul alone is the ultimate controller and creator of this world, and thus he alone is also the created. Similarly, the soul of all existence himself both maintains and is maintained, withdraws and is withdrawn. No other entity can be properly ascertained as separate from him, the Supreme Soul, who nonetheless is distinct from everything and everyone else. The appearance of the threefold material nature, which is perceived within him, has no actual basis. Rather, you should understand that this material nature, composed of the three modes, is simply the product of his illusory potency. Purport. The Absolute Truth, Lord Sri Krishna, expands his external potency and thus creates the material cosmos. As with the sun globe and its expanded rays, the Lord and his expanded potency are simultaneously one and different. Although to conditioned souls, material duality seems to be based on the modes of nature, the entire material manifestation is actually non-different from the Lord and is of one ultimately spiritual nature. The modes of nature create sense objects, demigods, human beings, animals, friends, enemies, and so forth. But in reality, everything is simply an expansion of the potency of the Supreme Lord. Foolishly, the conditioned soul tries to lord it over material nature, but the Lord himself, being non-different from that nature, is its only true proprietor. In several places, the Srimad Bhagavatam has given the example of the spider spinning its web by expanding thread from its own mouth. Similarly, through his own potency, the Lord manifests the material world, maintains it, and eventually withdraws it within himself. Although the Lord is the unique Supreme Personality of Godhead above everyone and everything, He is simultaneously and inconceivably non-different from everything. Therefore it is the Lord Himself who is manifested when the Lord creates, and it is the Lord Himself who is maintained when the Lord maintains, and it is the Lord Himself who is withdrawn at the time of annihilation. Although the Lord is non-different from both His spiritual abode and His material creation, still the spiritual abode, Vaikuntha, is always superior to the material manifestation. Both matter and spirit are energies of the Lord, yet the spiritual energy is molded into the eternal forms of bliss and knowledge, whereas the temporary forms of matter are symbols of ignorance and frustration for the conditioned souls who covet them. The Supreme Lord is Himself the reservoir of all pleasure, and is thus dear to His devotees. The presumption that the Lord cannot give us complete pleasure is due to our misidentifying Him as a product of the material modes of nature. As a result, we pursue false happiness in the deadly embrace of Maya, and thus deviate from our eternal loving relationship with Lord Krishna. Text 8. One who has properly understood the process of becoming firmly fixed in theoretical and realized knowledge, as described herein by me, does not indulge in material criticism or praise. Like the sun, he wanders freely throughout this world. Purport. Every living entity emanates from the Supreme Lord and is thus naturally full of realized knowledge. But when one becomes attached to praising or criticizing material good and bad for one's personal sense gratification, one's expert knowledge of the Lord becomes covered. A pure devotee should neither love nor hate any aspect of material illusion. He should rather accept whatever is favorable for serving Krishna and reject what is unfavorable, following the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master. Text 9. By direct perception, logical deduction, scriptural testimony, and personal realization, one should know that this world has a beginning and an end, and so is not the ultimate reality. Thus one should live in this world without attachment. Purport. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, there are two main material dualities. The first duality is that one sees material good and bad, beautiful and ugly, rich and poor, and so on. The second is that one sees the entire material world as separate from or independent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The first duality, that of opposites, is subject to dissolution by the influence of time, and the second duality, that of separateness, is merely a hallucination. One who is firmly convinced of the temporary, illusory nature of this world moves about freely without attachment. Although engaging in all types of devotional service for the Lord, such a person is never entangled and remains cheerful and satisfied in spiritual consciousness. Hare Krishna. 10. Sri Uddhava said, "My dear Lord, it is possible for this material existence to be the experience of either the soul, who is the seer, or of the body, which is the seen object. On the one hand, the spirit soul is innately endowed with perfect knowledge, and on the other hand, the material body is not a conscious living entity. To whom then does this experience of material existence pertain? Purport. Since the living entity is pure spirit soul, innately full of perfect knowledge and bliss, and since the material body is not a biochemical machine without knowledge or personal consciousness. I read that again. I put in a knot that shouldn't have been there. Once again. Purport. Since the living entity is pure spirit soul, innately full of perfect knowledge and bliss, and since the material body is a biochemical machine without knowledge or personal consciousness, who or what is actually experiencing the ignorance and anxiety of this material existence? The conscious experience of material life cannot be denied. And thus Uddhava asks Lord Krishna this question to elicit a more precise understanding of the process by which illusion occurs. Text 11. The spirit soul is inexhaustible, transcendental, pure, self-luminous, and never covered by anything material. It is like fire, but the non-living material body is like firewood, is dull and unaware. So in this world, who is it that actually undergoes the experience of material life? Purport. The words anavrita and agnivat are significant here. Fire can never be covered with darkness, because by nature, fire is illuminating. Similarly, the spirit soul is swayam jyoti, or self-luminous, and thus the soul is transcendental. He can never be covered by the darkness of material life. On the other hand, the material body, like firewood, is by nature dull and unilluminated. In itself, it does not have any awareness of life. If the soul is transcendental to material life, and the body is not even conscious of it, the following question arises. How does our experience of material existence actually take place? This is the mind-body problem. Text 12. Consciousness. What is it? The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, as long as the foolish spirit soul remains attracted to the material body, senses, and vital force, his material existence continues to flourish, although it is ultimately meaningless. Purport. Here the word sanikarshanam indicates that the pure spirit soul voluntarily connects himself with the material world, considering this a most fruitful arrangement. Actually, the situation is apartha, useless, unless one uses one's embodied situation to engage in the loving service of the Lord. At that time, one's connection is actually with Lord Krishna, not with the body, which becomes a mere instrument for executing one's higher purpose. 13. Actually, the living entity is transcendental to material existence. But because of his mentality of lording it over material nature, his material existential condition does not cease, and, just as in a dream, he is affected by all sorts of disadvantages. Purport. This same verse and other very similar verses occur elsewhere in the Srimad Bhagavatam. 3rd Canto, chapter 27, verse 4. 4th Canto, chapter 29, verses 35 and 73. And 11th Canto, chapter 22, verse 56. In fact, this verse completely explains the essence of illusion. So we read that verse again, you think? Actually, the living entity is transcendental to material existence. But because of his mentality of lording it over material nature, his material existential condition does not cease. And, just as in a dream, he is affected by all sorts of disadvantages. Text 14. Although while dreaming, a person experiences many undesirable things, upon awakening, he is no longer confused by the dream experiences. Purport. Even a liberated soul must observe material objects while living in this world. But being awake to Krishna consciousness, he understands that sensory pains and pleasures, like dreams, are also without substance. Thus the liberated soul is not bewildered by illusion. 15. Lamentation, elation, fear, anger, greed, confusion, and hankering, as well as birth and death, are experiences of the false ego and not of the pure soul. Purport. False ego is the pure soul's illusory identification with the subtle material mind and the gross material body. As a result of this illusory identification, the conditioned soul feels lamentation for things lost, jubilation over things gained, fear of things inauspicious, anger at the frustration of his desires, and greed for sense gratification. And so, bewildered by such false attractions and aversions, the conditioned soul must accept further material bodies, which means he must undergo repeated births and deaths. One who is self-realized knows that all such mundane emotions have nothing to do with the pure soul, whose natural propensity is to engage in the loving service of the Lord. The living entity who falsely identifies with his body, senses, life, air, and mind, and who dwells within these coverings, assumes the form of his own materially conditioned qualities and work. He is designated variously in relation to the total material energy, and thus, under the strict control of supreme time, he is forced to run here and there within material existence. Remember, Prabhupada used to imitate the cars that would zoom, zoom. I can't do it like he did, but he would imitate, or the fire trucks going, going one place to the next. Purport. False ego, which causes the living entity to suffer material existence, is here described in detail as the illusory identification with the material body, senses, life, air, and mind. The word Kala refers directly to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who imposes the limiting segments of time upon the conditioned souls. The limiting segments of time. Who imposes the limiting segments of time upon the conditioned souls. I'll be back in a minute. Keeping them tightly bound under the laws of nature. Liberation is not an impersonal experience. Liberation is attainment of one's eternal body, senses, mind, and intelligence in the association of the personality of Godhead. We can revive our eternal liberated personality, free from the contamination of false ego, by dedicating ourselves to the loving service of the Lord in Krishna consciousness. When the pure spirit soul accepts the false ego, he must undergo material suffering. One automatically conquers the false ego by accepting oneself in pure Krishna consciousness to be the eternal servant of Lord Krishna. Text 17. Although the false ego has no factual basis, it is perceived in many forms as the functions of the mind, speech, life air, and bodily faculties. But with the sword of transcendental knowledge, sharpened by worship of a bona fide spiritual master, a sober sage will cut off this false identification and live in this world free from all material attachment. Purport. The word Bahurupa Rupitam, perceived in many forms, also indicates that the false ego is manifest in the belief that one is a demigod, a great man, a beautiful lady, an oppressed worker, a tiger, a bird, a seagull, an insect, and so on. By the influence of false ego, the pure soul accepts some material covering to be its ultimate self, but such ignorance can be removed by the process described in this verse. 18. Real spiritual knowledge is based on the discrimination of spirit from matter, and it is cultivated by scriptural evidence, austerity, direct perception, reception of the Puranas' historical narrations, and logical inference. The absolute truth, which alone was present before the creation of the universe, and which alone will remain after its destruction, is also the time factor and the ultimate cause. Even in the middle stage of this creation's existence, the absolute truth alone is the actual reality. Purport. Material scientists and philosophers are desperately searching for the ultimate material cause or principle, which is described here as kala, the time factor. The material process of cause and effect takes place entirely within a sequence of time. In other words, the time factor is the motivating impetus for material cause and effect. This time factor is a manifestation of the Supersoul, the form of the Supreme Lord that pervades and supports the cosmic manifestation. The method for acquiring knowledge is scientifically described here, and those who are serious, reasonable scholars will take advantage of the transcendental epistemology revealed here by the Lord. We'll read that verse again. Real spiritual knowledge is based on the discrimination of spirit from matter, and is cultivated by scriptural evidence, austerity, direct perception, reception of the Puranas' historical narrations, and logical inference. The absolute truth, which alone was present before the creation of the universe, and which alone will remain after its destruction, is also the time factor and the ultimate cause. Even in the middle stage of this creation's existence, the absolute truth alone is the actual reality. Text 19. Gold alone is presented before its manufacture into gold products. The gold alone remains after the product's destruction, and the gold alone is the essential reality while it is being utilized under various designations. Similarly, I alone exist before the creation of this universe, after its destruction, and during its maintenance. Purport. Gold is manufactured into many types of jewelry, as well as into coins and other luxurious products. But at each stage, before manufacture, during utilization, and afterward, the essential reality is gold. In the same way, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the essential reality, both the dynamic and the ingredient cause of everything. All throughout the material creation, the Lord is simply setting into motion His own potency, which is not different from Him. So what's to worry? What's to worry about? Text 20. One more. The material mind manifests in 3 phases of consciousness: wakefulness, sleep, and deep sleep, which are products of the 3 modes of nature. The mind further appears in 3 different roles: the perceiver, the perceived, and the regulator of perception. Thus the mind is manifested variously throughout these 3-fold designations. But it is the 4th factor, existing separately from all of this, that alone constitutes the absolute truth. Purport. As stated in the Katha Upanishad 2:15, tam eva bantam anubhati sarvam tasya bhasa sarvamidang vibhati. Everything radiates its illumination in pursuance of his original illumination. His light illuminates everything in this universe. As thus described, the entire range of perception, cognition, and sensitivity is an insignificant expansion of the perception, cognition, and sensitivity of the personality of Godhead. Hare Krishna. This is knowledge, jnana. Knowledge of the reality. Seen through the lens of this reality, we can become detached from the world. We'll stop here. Hare Krishna. Any points that were stuck out in the mind of the hearers? Radharaman, like clockwork. We're going to call him Old Faithful. Old Faithful Radharaman has raised his hand again.
Maharaj, I took note of 2 verses, or actually one purport followed by a verse which I thought was very much worthy of further discussion. The end of 11:28:16 purport says, liberation is not an impersonal experience. Liberation is attainment of one's eternal body, senses, mind, and intelligence in the association of the personality of Godhead. We can revive our eternal liberated personality free from the contamination of false ego by dedicating ourselves to the loving service of the Lord in Krishna consciousness. When the pure spirit soul accepts the false ego, he must undergo material suffering. One automatically conquers the false ego by accepting oneself in pure Krishna consciousness to be the eternal servant of Lord Krishna. And then I think that actually the verse that follows straight afterwards is also very much connected. Although the false ego has no factual basis, this is 11:28:17, it is perceived in many forms as the functions of the mind, speech, life, air, and bodily faculties, but with the sword of transcendental knowledge sharpened by worship of a bona fide spiritual master, a sober sage will cut off this false identification and live in this world free from all material attachment.
Yeah. So Krishna says in the Gita, bahunam jnanam ante, jnanavan mam prapadyate, vasudevak savamiti samahatma sadulabha. So samahatma sadulabha means rarely achieved is this consciousness. But after many, many births, bahunam janmanan mante jnanavan mam prapadyate, one eventually surrenders unto Krishna and accepts him to be everything. Sarvamiti. And Samahatma. So there's two processes. There's more than two processes, but we come to jnana now. So by studying the nature of ourselves, the material world, and the different features of the material world that surround us, and coming to the conclusion that we cannot be this body, we cannot be this mind. By analysis, the material elements that compose the material body are inert. They're just inert. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, they're inert. The mind is inert. Mind, intelligence, false ego. These are inert, separate energies from the Lord. So the question is, if, and this was the question that was raised in the beginning of the chapter, if the body is inherently inert, and the mind is inherently inert as material elements, what is perceiving? When you look through the eye and you see the forms, and everyone sees the same forms, otherwise they would try to go through the wall instead of open the door, or everybody wouldn't be able to stop when they saw red and green and things like that. There are insane philosophers that say this is just all a manufactured in our minds, and therefore if a tree falls in the middle of a forest with no perceiver to watch it, it didn't actually happen, because these things are just created in our minds. But if you look at it this way, as we just heard, the dream at night, you're dreaming, and you're seeing things, and you're doing things, and you're feeling things, and you're interacting with different other beings. Some of them you know, some of them you don't know. And then you wake up, and then you're in your bed, and all of those things are just, where are they? What are they? You forget them in a few minutes. And then you're back in this, external consciousness, reality. And we think this is reality. And we do the same things that we did in the dream, in this reality, till you go back to sleep, and then you're in a dream again. And back and forth, back and forth. So what's going on here? So this is the development of spiritual thinking, develop of logic and reasoning, which will allow you to follow this train of thought to come to the conclusion on your own, and that's called logical inference, as was mentioned in one of the verses we just read. Logical inference. By logical inference, you can understand that the consciousness must be different than the mind and the body. What sees has to have eyes that can see. The eye cannot see. Take the eye out. Point it and look everywhere. It doesn't see anything. Even when you analyze it in terms of light entering into the optic nerve and then going back to the brain and creating electrical impulses, you don't see these pictures inside there. So what's happening? And unless you understand this, then you are living in an illusion. Just like you go to a movie and you see patterns of light on a screen, and because they're acting in a certain way, you'll cry, or you'll laugh, or you'll get terrified, or whatever. And it just lights on a screen. Therefore, the person who understands this can move through the world free and cheerful and not attached, because they know that these things that are happening that appear to be, substantial, are Krishna's energy, but are temporary. The material energy is eternal. Krishna is eternal. Time is eternal. The soul is eternal. But it's the forms that we interact with, the karma that's temporary. And therefore it's not so easy to come out of it and to actually, by logical inference and by spiritual intelligence, to be able to see through the eyes of knowledge. Jnana chakra, jnana. We're taught, this is the Jnana-yoga being talked about. Jnana-yoga. We have to see, not through our own mental speculation and through our misidentification with ourselves as the mind or the body or other forms or whatever activities. That's the goal of this jnana yoga. Bahunam jnanamante, janmanamante mean jnanavanmam prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sadurlabhaha. After many, many births of trying to understand this, studying this, then you can understand that the soul is different than the body and that all of the energies are simply transformations of Krishna, his energy, his energies. Then we naturally go from all of these things to Krishna. And as soon as we go to Krishna, then we can feel real emotion, we can feel real understanding, we can see things clearly, we can become satisfied. Hare Krishna. That's all I have to say about that. Do we have anything else from cyberspace?
Yes. So one thing from Dalanitai.
From Dalanitai.
Yes.
Oh, Hare Krishna Dalanitai.
He says, Dear and respected Srila Guru Maharaj, please accept my obeisance. All glories to your holiness. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
You do have a way with words, Dalanitai. He used to teach English in Taiwan.
Did I understand correctly that it is the false ego only which experiences physical sensation, such as pain for instance? And does this explain why doctors were surprised that, despite of his serious physical condition, by the end of his life on earth, Srila Prabhupada did not seem to experience or react to pain, as he was free from the false ego? Thank you, your servant Dalanitai.
Yes, it's true, but externally he went through the process of leaving the body. And those of us who were there in the room, there are certain signs that it goes through when the soul leaves the body. That's the same with everyone. But his consciousness was fixed. But he still went through that. Externally, if you watched him, his body was going smaller and smaller. And then eventually he lay back and he opened his mouth. And the soul, we don't know exactly where the soul went, out of here or whatever. But he chanted Hare Krishna and went and left. So you could see literally the difference. You could see his soul leaving the body, and you could see the soul acting through that body, which was not possible to not be screaming in pain. He didn't take any pain relievers. I mean, actually what you just said, the question, is just what I actually got through explaining very clearly. You know, the soul is not actually doing things in the material world. It's the material modes of nature that are doing them. But we can't perceive it because the false ego forces us to identify with it. And Prabhupada used to use the example, if you worked very hard your whole life to get a particular machine, like one of the fanciest cars in the world, you know, you have that desire, that intense desire to drive in a Rolls Royce as the owner, and finally you succeed, and you're driving it out of the showroom floor, you know, you're so eager, you know, to get it onto the road so people can look at you and go, oh my God, look at that, you know, and you can wave and play the king or whatever, the rich person, and then a big lorry comes and finishes it. and you got it out there so fast you forgot to get the insurance, then you're really in anxiety. You're like you lose yourself. You lose people in the depression. They jumped out of windows because they lost all their money, and they thought they were gone. They thought they were lost. Just like the car, it's crashed. You're not crashed, just the car's crashed. But at the same time, if you're a chauffeur driving it for a rich man and he's in the back and he's paying for it, he's got the insurance, and a lorry comes and crashes, it's the same incident, the same thing, but it doesn't bother you as much. I mean, it may, because you're going to get chastised by the rich man because you made a wrong turn or you didn't drive properly, but you don't have to deal with the concept that this is yours and you worked your whole life for it and now it's gone, ruined in an instant. So that's the concept of identification. The soul is the real person, and he's identifying with the body, and therefore he is really attached to it, and he thinks that when something happens, goes wrong with it, that he's affected, but he's not affected. The soul is never affected. So you have to be reconvinced, unconvinced, by the process of devotional service and by austerities and by regulation and living in goodness and all these cultivation of knowledge and all these different things, thinking it through, logical inference. You have to take the knowledge that you're getting from the scriptures and deduce from it that you are not the body, and you have to accept it. Even if you can't perceive it right away, you have to accept it because it's true by logic and reasoning. And then as soon as you get that, you feel detached. There's that famous story of Pingala in the, what was it, 9th Canto?
The 11th, a little bit earlier.
Oh, 11th Canto, yes, Pingala. Yeah, Krishna's talking to Uddhava, Pingala. She's a prostitute, and she's standing out in front of her house, wearing fancy clothes and or not so many clothes or whatever, and looking at every man that goes by and think, oh, this one will come in, or this one will surely come in, that one will surely come in. And after a long time of doing that, one night she said, this is ridiculous, this is no fun, and she just began to feel detached by the realization that this is no fun. It doesn't make any sense, doesn't make any logical sense. Bilva Mangal Thakur, he was a Brahmin attached to a prostitute. So one night it was just completely bad weather, and he just swam and ran through the rain and grabbed snakes to climb over walls and dead bodies in order to float over the river, and she somehow really got there. And she was amazed. Chintamani, the prostitute, opened the door and says, what are you doing? If you're so attached to this body, if you were so attached to Krishna, you would be a liberated soul immediately. And he heard that and he said, oh, that's right. Why did I take all this trouble for this? And then he just immediately gave it up, and he went to Vrindavan and became Bilva Mangal Thakur, liberated soul. So the answer is yes. Hare Krishna. Huh?
One from Yadutama.
Yadutama's got another question. He's his active intelligence. Yadutama.
This is
Hare Krishna, Yadutama.
Hare Krishna, dear Gurudev. The reading tonight was so refreshing. I was really struck by the idea brought out at the end of the purport of verses 6 and 7, which stated, the presumption that the Lord cannot give us complete pleasure is due to our misidentifying him as a product of the material modes of nature. This statement really highlights the source of our distresses but even more so, puts the mind into a corner, forcing it to accept that Krishna does actually give us everything we could ever possibly want. Thank you so much for helping us hear these things.
Hare Krishna, thank you. Well put. Well said. And with that, we'll give Yadutam with the last word, unless there's somebody else or something else.
There's something from Vrindavaneshwari Devi Dasi.
Oh, Hare Krishna Vrindavaneshwari.
Says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. 11:28:16. We can revive our eternal liberated personality, free from the contamination of false ego, by dedicating ourselves to the loving service of the Lord in Krishna consciousness. I feel like I just learned the true meaning of the term free spirit, which is free from contamination of false ego, and not constant enjoyment in your own way, fueling one's passions.
Yes, because in reality, we are eternal servants of Krishna. And in the illusion of material existence, we have misidentified with our bodies and minds and think that we are the masters, or we're trying to be the masters of some other material body or thing or whatever. So as soon as we realize this, then we become free, because we can serve. But everyone's serving, everyone. But they're serving being forced. And if you stop paying them, they'll stop serving. So there's no love. So love means you serve without payment.
There's one thing from Pranahari.
Yes, Prana.
Says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Some reflections. This from texts 6 and 7 purport also stuck out to me. The presumption that the Lord cannot give us complete pleasure is due to our misidentifying Him as a product of the material modes of nature.
Seems to be attracting everyone.
As a result, we pursue false happiness in the deadly embrace of Maya, and thus deviate from our eternal loving relationship with Lord Krishna. In comparison, if we see Krishna's personality and body and activities as transcendental, Bhagavad Gita 4:9, then we give up Maya and attain a transcendental position in his service. By deeming Krishna's personality as illusory, Mayavad philosophy proves itself to be covered atheism, which increases our material identification. We heard in response to Uddhava's question that the cause of the living entity's experience of illusion is actually false ego. Mayavad philosophy necessarily increases one's ahankar, since it places oneself in the position of the Supreme God and denies the reality of anything or anyone except oneself, including God, deeming them as Maya.
Yes.
So sinister a philosophy.
Well said, Prana. Well said, as usual.
A little bit left. It says, I am thankful to Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas for compassionately debunking this misunderstanding for our eternal spiritual welfare.
Yes.
Thank you for the daily reading, Maharaj.
Yeah, that's real gyan. This is what you were describing was the illusory gyan, where they think it's knowledge, that they can become God by negating material existence, and including Krishna, negating Krishna, and realize that they're actually the absolute truth. That is the deepest form of ignorance. Okay, we'll stop here. We're a little over an hour. I usually keep it to an hour nowadays. Thank you very much, everyone, for your very lovely reflections and questions, and helping us go deeper into this basic truth. The basic truth. We're not the body. We're not the mind. And the material forms around us are transformations of Krishna energy. So therefore Krishna is giving us everything. And therefore he deserves to be surrendered to. He deserves to be meditated upon. He deserves to be seen as everything, because he is. Okay, with that, we'll close tonight's daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books. Thanks everyone again, and we'll see you tomorrow night, same place, same station, here in the Haven, Hive. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. See you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.